Final Fantasy VII is a good game. I know, real divisive statement to make. Thanks, Christian. But as of March 2024, it wasn't a statement I'd actually agree with. Let me explain. Final Fantasy VII Remake never clicked with me. And believe me, I tried. But there was a handful of design and narrative choices I felt were antithetical to the game's overall experience. We'll get into it in just a bit, but in short, I felt myself brushing up against disconnects throughout my runtime. As far as audience reception, I was in the minority. So when review scores started coming in for 7 Rebirth, all mostly praising the game, I found myself hesitant to give the game a go. Would I be spending dozens of hours playing another game I'd ultimately find disappointing? And with only so many precious hours in the day to dedicate to our hobbies, it was a gamble I wasn't sure I'd make. Luckily, however, FOMO won over and I decided to give the series yet another college try. And I mean a serious try. To be open to all the elements that make a Final Fantasy game a Final Fantasy game. Party management, side quests and side characters, minigames, chocobo riding, a long-ass list of spells and materia, a melodramatic narrative, all of it. And for whatever reason, I found myself slowly loving what the game was doing more than I really thought I would, or even expected I would. All the subtle changes to design, narrative, and interactivity just sort of fell into place this time around. I found the sum of its parts to be the formula for Rebirth's success. Take a load off, reslot your materia, and set your party. It's time for another save room. I know you're worried, but let's head back to 2020.
And the Oscar goes to?
Conference on the coronavirus crisis. There you see him, Vice President Mike Pence.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
There's still so much to be done.
Like a lot of people, Remake was my first experience with Final Fantasy VII. My knowledge of the game only went so far as knowing Cloud, Tifa, Aerith, Sephiroth, that one spoiler moment we won't talk about, and that it was possibly one of the best stories in gaming ever made. High expectations. Through osmosis and knowing that the game would be split into separate parts, I knew that the Midgar section of the original wasn't all that substantial compared to the rest of the game. Subsequent criticism of 7 Remake was that a lot of the game was padded out to extend its length and justify a full price tag. And maybe that's partly true, but you also can't deny that Remake allows for more substantial development of side characters. Shout out to my girl Jessie, whose philosophy becomes important to our main characters and to our understanding of the game later on. Seriously, everyone needs to talk about Jessie more. Why aren't we? But this also means you get a lot of main quests that revolve around errands, stopgaps that hinder pacing of a narrative I'm only sneaking glimpses of. And there's, of course, the design choices of hallways and shimmies that funnel us into segments that, to me, felt overly restrictive and less than fun. And it's not like these are totally absent in Rebirth. There's still these sections of slowed walking and yellow paint, discourse-inducing climbing walls, but it's that the open environment world provides much more freedom than in Remake's linear setting. And sure, maybe it doesn't help that I chose to play 7 Remake off the backs of Call of Duty Warzone and Animal Crossing New Horizons, both games in which not only emphasize player freedom, but are defined by our individual expression, but it also can't excuse the criticism altogether either. Okay, I'm gonna be honest. A lot of this was also on me, It was my first Final Fantasy since 10 back on PS2, and I fundamentally did not come to grips with the remake on its own terms enough. Because I wanted to spend more time playing as Cloud, swinging a giant sword around enemies, I spent less time engaging with the party system. Which also means I spent less time setting materia that made sense for my party as a whole. And again, which then means combat encounters became frustrating battles I would try to brute myself through. By my own devices, I made the moment-to-moment gameplay much harder than it needed to be. And that was frustrating. I'm not joking when I say I set myself up for failure here. I took off Assess early in the game and never set it back into my equipment. I never scanned enemies, man. Why would I do that to myself? Needless to say, I've learned my lesson since then, and we'll get into that soon, but there was one element of the game I just couldn't satisfy, and that's Remake's trouble with eco-criticism. 2020 was also the year I was completing grad school. Subtle flex, I know, but hey, gotta get my money's worth out of my degree any way I can. Sorry. As a master's student, each of us in the English program chose a focus area, a niche in the field we'd study and become masters in. Mine was eco-criticism and critical dystopia. Subheader, nature in works of sci-fi and speculative fiction, 20th through 21st century. I liked sci-fi shit, and I liked it even more when it connected to nature. And part of my master's work extended beyond books, into films, and into games. One of which was Hideo Kojima's Death Stranding, a game that I think is insanely fruitful for discussions of how nature and dystopias intersect. I was on an unbelievably sick high playing that game, thinking about that game, and writing about that game. Legit, it rocked. So, as my grad work was culminating, after all my graduate papers, my exams, and defending my thesis, it was time to get back to AAA gaming with a new title. One I thought would just as nicely fit into my little schema of nature and dystopia. A game I went into with presupposed expectations I didn't know it could actually satisfy. That was 7 Remake. And I think that's where I went wrong. Yeah, Barrett talks a big game about how we're running the planet dry, and how the only solution is to commit egregious acts of eco-terrorism as a last line of defense. But the meditations never truly went beyond that. There was stuff there throughout the game, sure, but nothing as fruitful as the games I was playing just a few months prior. And that disappointed me. To have Jesse as the sole arbiter of Avalanche's eco-terrorism right at the end should have had a bigger impact. But does anyone else in the party really reckon with that? Maybe they think about it. But the game needs to refocus on its main events regarding Sephiroth and Shinra that it ultimately felt like an afterthought. Who's looking out for the people of Sector 7? I don't know. But I think that approach was wrong. Because Final Fantasy isn't an indictment of the Anthropocene. It uses the events and the philosophy as a jumping off point to tell a narrative about these specific characters. And I didn't get that. That's not to say we can't criticize Remake for not going hard enough on its eco-criticism, but my conclusions about the game as a whole shouldn't live and die on that foundation. So, in comes Rebirth. There's a Venn diagram of elements that I think make 7 Rebirth into a Final Fantasy game that finally works for me. That's character relationships, side quests, and engaging combat. Okay, I can already hear the claims about how much of this game is actually a collection of minigames, and while there is validity to that, please, hear me out. At the center of these circles is the true make or break that'll define your experience with Rebirth. Meeting the game on its terms. Final Fantasy VII, at its heart, is about the relationship between our core cast of characters. If my issue with 7 Remake is the time it took me to come to grips with how much of this is actually the focus of the game, then Rebirth avoids this by frequently foregrounding it. Cloud has to repeatedly deal with a fractured mind, and we see the party respond, with Cloud now, at least partially, allowing himself to be a bit more emotionally vulnerable to his friends. Tifa allows herself moments of anger and frustration, and even subtly works to become less of a people pleaser through the game. Barrett and Yuffie quickly develop a bond, with Barrett's parental instincts sublimating his annoyances at dealing with a teenage girl. Red 13 flexes autonomy and tactical know-how for us to witness. And Aerith feels outspoken. She's direct with Cloud and isn't afraid to call him out when he fails to pick up on signals. Everyone has their own identity and motivations. And it's the thrill of watching them brush against one another that makes up the enjoyment of seeing them all interact with each other through the game. This, of course, leads into the most obvious and maybe most important element of Final Fantasy VII. Love. The emotional tension of romantic relationships is usually the driving force in a lot of drama. Across any media, the evergreen will they, won't they provides vicarious drama and excitement. Elena Fisher meeting Chloe Frazier.
Last year's model.
Geralt having to decide between Triss, Yennefer, or neither. Rory Gilmore struggling to come to grips with who she should be with. Dean Forrester or Jess Mariano. Yes, I know it's my second time referencing Gilmore Girls in one of my videos, but I don't care. Gilmore Girls is amazing. And the romantic tension is even better. Okay? Watch Gilmore Girls. Final Fantasy VII functions the same. The drama of who Rory will choose, Jess or Dean, is fundamentally the same in 7 Rebirth. And has been the same for years. Even Robert freaking Pattinson is aware of the great cultural divide.
But it's the two sides, it's the two options of girls you can have.
You don't know Final Fantasy? No.
It's the best.
Tifa or Aerith? And that question is expanded in Rebirth even. Who will you take on the date at the Gold Saucer? No, really. Tell me. I want to know. Shit is exciting. Rebirth provides plenty of opportunities to showcase this through its runtime, even if the examples aren't even all that substantial. It's enough to keep the hook going. Picking the same style of outfits for Tifa and Aerith as the one Cloud chooses in Costa del Sol deepens our relationship with them. Like, actually, the game notices we have the same style and prompts a message that our relationship has deepened. It's such a small but surprising touch that reminds me much of the game really is about these relationships. Sure, we're on a hunt for Sephiroth, but that also isn't the sole focus. It's the road trip in between, the literal journey, the space to develop kinship with one another, to enjoy a cocktail on the beach, to hit the amusement park, to live life among friends. Man, I really should play a Yakuza game in full at some point, huh? This leads us to Rebirth's side content. Look, I know the game has, honestly, way too many minigames for its own good. Queen's Blood is fine, but I don't know, man. Sometimes there's too many of these matches the game tries to get you to play along the main quest. And yeah, I did win the tournament on the boat. Thank you. I giggled at Red 13 moonwalking, alright? But here's the thing. Rebirth figured out how to encourage starting and completing side quests. And that's thanks to the development of relationships between characters by completing said missions. A reward at the end of the proverbial tunnel. That freaking simple. It's both a praise and a criticism that if you try to beeline through the main quest, that you might not get a fuller experience the developers intended for us to have. You know, I think about Elden Ring here, and how Margit the Fell Omen at Stormvale Castle acted as a sort of skill check for players. he was fucking tough. I heard his little monologue he shouts at you when he kills you like a dozen times, at least. Actually, I just pulled up my Elden Ring Google Doc, and I didn't even beat him until 10 hours and 49 minutes into my playthrough. He's the first boss. But again, here's the thing. Even though the game tells you to follow the light pointed by the sights of grace, to follow the main path, it ultimately leads to a fight you are probably not ready for yet. In order to progress, you have to go back and explore Limgrave. Maybe even go south to the Weeping Peninsula. Engage with the game on its terms. Okay, technically you can skip Margit by going around the cliffs and heading straight to Liurnia, but this is by far the minority experience people will have with Elden Ring, so let's pretend you have to fight him anyway. Rebirth is kind of the same. Not that any one specific boss encounter along the main quest is insurmountable, but that engaging with the side content prior to advancing the main quest closes the gap between what your party can or can't handle. But more on that in just a little bit. Instead, what I think matters most for our reading is how the side content keeps fulfilling the relationship side of the game. Interactivity and personality are on full display pretty much anytime you start a side quest. The design here is wonderful, with each side quest partnering Cloud with a different member of your party. This gives us time to talk to each other, learn about what they care about, what drives them. Is it silly that one of the side quests culminates in Tifa entering a sit-up contest? Sure, but the importance comes from the opportunity for Tifa and Cloud to connect. It's actually insane that the first time you really hear Cloud come out of his shell in this game is when Tifa starts asking him about post-workout meals. Dude is finally speaking in multiple complete sentences here. And it's also just nice to see the UI prompts that a party member liked how I responded to an NPC. To click L1 and watch the little emoticon floating over their head gradually turn into a smile over the course of several hours. It's a small addition, yeah, but one that makes me feel like I'm making an actual impact in the relationship with my party. And tell you what, I'll acquiesce a bit. Yes, not much development outside of side content is actually happening at any given moment. If you're not actively seeking these precious moments of scripted dialogue, then the game will not evoke this same feeling of a growing relationship. Honestly, it might just feel a little lonely. Might even make you hate Chadley more. And I'll agree here too. Some of the side quests can feel like busy work. Sometimes, yeah, it can be a bit of a drag to do yet another minigame you're already getting your fill of during the main campaign. I'm with you, but I think the end justifies the means here a little bit. I'm okay with criticizing pacing if the moment-to-moment gameplay is making me care more about the characters I'm spending dozens of hours with. Ultimately, engaging with the game on its terms and its side content leads to a fuller experience that was maybe not really present in 7 Remake. And that puts us at combat. Rebirth feels really fucking good to play. And it should. A remake of a turn-based RPG reshaped into an action RPG should have frenetic, intense gameplay. We know this from Remake. Sure, it took me a while to wrap my head around limit breaks and what to do to increase my limit level, but it's the addition of synergy attacks that made combat and party management finally click in ways 7 Remake never really did for me. When exactly it was is sort of hard to pinpoint, but I can tell you what directly caused this to solidify. Being forced to play as other party members. Suddenly, I found myself having to learn not just what materia my party is currently equipped with, but how others play as a primary means in combat. So, when I do get reunited with Cloud again, I can switch back and forth to maximize efficiency in any given combat scenario. In short, the game made me lock in But there's something beyond understanding systems that I think makes Rebirth better. And guess what? That's freaking Chadley. Look, I know Chadley is also in Remake, but something about how he synergizes with the gameplay loop in Rebirth just works. Beyond all the yapping he does, he's actually sort of integral to the overall experience of Rebirth as a whole. Just like in Remake, completing intel reports results in Cloud rewarded with unique materia. But it's different in Rebirth. Here, instead of fulfilling parameters while in battle, you unlock the means for the materia reward by exploring the open environment segments and engaging with the world. Do enough side activities to unlock a short combat simulator trial. Complete the trial and attain the reward. Slot your new powerful materia and watch yourself become God to the foes you find out in the wild. It's such a satisfying gameplay loop that not only does it outshine the first game in the Remake trilogy, but also outshines the newest entry in the franchise. Yes, this is me saying the combat in Final Fantasy XVI never got all that interesting. I'm sorry, but the 2 combos and multiple cooldowns just got stale. Fast. In tandem, these 3 things create an interesting intersection that sort of ties all of the game together. Through the primary means of engagement, you enter this feedback loop of interactivity happening throughout the game. Start a side quest that makes you engage with the open world. End up discovering intel that opens up more combat scenarios for better gear. Complete the quest to strengthen relationships within your party and learn about them on a personal level. Seek to further the bond and find yourself back to the start to begin the loop all over again. Obviously, this design isn't anything revolutionary, but it is one that's simple. After all, the aim of the game is to get us to get to know our characters on a deeper level. And the experience really is the reward here. Maybe it's a precarious gameplay loop that Rebirth sets itself upon. Not everyone wants to escort a dog halfway across the Junon region. And I won't fault you if you don't. The end of the world might be looming after all. There's more important things to take care of, right? But there's something, I don't know, charming, earnest, genuine about walking that stupid dog and hearing a song you won't hear ever again through the rest of the game. A song made for this one specific, dumb, tiny little side quest. But it works. It makes me smile. It makes me feel like the developers know I'm not just wasting time with an otherwise trivial task. Actually, if anything, it reinforces my reading of the game. Yeah, Tifa calls Barrett a softie, but it means something when we see it in action as he encourages the mayor's son to take the money and build a future for his forthcoming baby. Willing interactivity, engaging with the game on its terms. The sum of its freaking parts, man. Let me know what you think of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Maybe I'll even hear you out in the comments. For 2000 Gil. Like and subscribe.